Just a minute. Just a minute.
90.
Yeah, we will start the webinar now.
No, 70.
I am Ramarao, convener of the webinar committee. On behalf of Indian Nuclear Society and on behalf of the webinar committee and on my own behalf, I want to wholeheartedly welcome Professor Sandeep Trivedi on this webinar program. I should tell you that he's a very passionate researcher in his own field of cosmology, physics, and quantum physics, and so on and so forth. He's not only a passionate researcher, I'm sure everybody will agree that he's a passionate teacher himself. So we will have a good opportunity to listen to his path-breaking research and findings. I will definitely promise the participants that you will not be disappointed listening to him. So before I ask Professor Sandeep Trivedi to start with, we will have a brief introductory remark by our President C.S.K. Mehta, and then we will have an introduction to the speaker, and then we will have the talk by the speaker. And then after that, we will take a couple of questions if there are any. Then we'll have a small roundup for the benefit of the participants, and then a formal vote of thanks. So now I will request our Honorable President C.S.K. Mehta to give his introductory talk.
Thank you, Dr. Ramarao. Honorable Professor Trivedi.
Thank you.
Let me welcome you very much wholeheartedly to this webinar, and we are privileged to have you there. So, dear INS members, invitees, and special guests, and other associates, it is my pleasure to have you on this webinar. This committee has been organizing various lectures from the eminent persons, starting with Dr. Kapurkar and other people that one. And the objective is that we acquaint our members with the latest development in the field of nuclear science and engineering and other frontier areas. And they in turn become the ambassador to propagate their knowledge to their colleagues in the various fields, and also look at the questions and answers of the general public so that we can promote nuclear science and engineering and also support general support for frontier science that we get. Today, we are really lucky to have Professor Sandeep Trivedi from TIFR, who is well known in the knowledge of various aspects of string theory, particle physics, and other frontier research areas, including the black hole mysteries and so on. And it is our pleasure to listen to him. Of course, many of us may not be having a proper background, but I'm sure after hearing Professor Trivedi, will be better educated and will appreciate the situation quite well. I recall our association, which is continuous one, the TFR. TFR is doing the frontier research at the international and national level. And our association is start right from Dr. Bhabha being the first director there. MGK Menon and Dr. Jha, he was the director, he was from the first batch, and my colleague. And it was a really pleasure to have all these people on there.
I see.
If you allow me to say that one, KFR has been mother to the creation of the nuclear science and engineering. And we continue to have lot of interaction and support in the various fundamental knowledge from this institute. And I have a pleasure to have a continued interaction with the TFR there one day. I very warmly welcome again Professor Trivedi
Thank you.
and I request him to deliver his talk. And before that, I will request Dr. Ramanamurthy to introduce him for the knowledge of the other INS members. So, thank you very much once again for your kind acceptance of our invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So it's my pleasant duty to introduce Professor Sandeep Trivedi to this forum. Professor Sandeep Trivedi, Distinguished Professor TIFR and former Director TIFR, is a theoretical physicist of international repute. He completed his Master of Science in Physics from IIT Kanpur in 1985. He was awarded his PhD in 1990 from Caltech, US, and went on to work as a postdoctoral research associate at Institute of Advanced Studies, Princeton, until 1992, and subsequently at Caltech as a senior research fellow from 1992 to 1994. He was an associate scientist at the Department of Theoretical Physics at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, US, from 1994 to 1999. Unlike many of our scientists, we are happy to say that Professor Trivedi decided to relocate to India, and he came and joined the Department of Theoretical Physics, TIFR, in 1999, and is currently a distinguished professor at TIFR. He is also the member of the Program Advisory Board of International Center for Theoretical Sciences. During a career spanning over 30 years, he has established himself as one of the leading theoretical physicists of the country, recognized internationally for his stellar contributions. He is well known for his research and insights on string theory, particularly so in creating the first models of accelerated expansion of the universe in low energy supersymmetric strings. His research areas apart from string theory include cosmology and particle physics. He has been the course director of several national and international schools and workshops, and a much sought after lecturer in the national and international circuits in his domain of expertise. He has delivered invited talks in innumerable prestigious forums over the span of his career. He has more than 72 publications in high-impact peer-reviewed journals such as Physical Reviews D, Physics Letters B, Journal of High Energy Physics, and many others. He is a fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences and the Indian National Science Academy. Professor Trivedi has been the recipient of several prestigious national and international awards, including the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award in Physical Sciences in 2005, the Infosys Prize in 2010 in the category of Physical Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences Prize in Physics in 2015, and the H.K. Firodia Award for Excellence in Science and Technology in 2018. Without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to invite Professor Trivedi to take us on an exciting voyage of the accelerating universe and its consequences. Over to Professor Trivedi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramanmurthy. Dr. Ramarao. It's a great privilege for me to be here today in meeting of the Indian Nuclear Society, and I thank you all for this opportunity. The topic I'm going to talk about is one which I have been excited about for most of my career, and I hope I can share this excitement with you all. Let me, at the very outset, acknowledge all the support from TIFR and, of course, from the DAE, which, allow me to say, from my side, is really the mother organization, without which, I couldn't have done anything. And I want to say this one thing that, since it was mentioned that I did work for several years abroad and came back to India. But I tell you, the kind of opportunities the DAE gives us for doing our work, I think they are second to none in the world. I mean, you don't get this kind of freedom almost anywhere, I think. And I am truly grateful for that. Okay, so here is the basic outline of my talk, and the presentation is for about 1 hour. If you all think I should make it shorter, please don't hesitate. Let me know. I can do that also, but this is what I planned. What I want to begin with first is the remarkable advances in experiment over the past 2 decades, but really I would say that have gathered steam over the past decade or so, which have allowed us to learn about the universe at large, which means over the longest distance scales and going back to the very early times, shortly after the Big Bang. This has been a domain of speculative theoretical work for much, even before these past 2 decades. But what is really exciting for me is that the experimental advances now are bringing hard data with which we can confront theory. And you'll all agree that's the best way progress is made in science. So I wanted to start with the data and give you a sense of the excitement that we are all feeling in the field as the data gets better and better. And one of the key things the data has taught us is that the universe is accelerating. Now, what does this even mean? How do we know this? These are some of the questions we'll discuss in the first part of this talk. Now, the second part of the talk will be more theoretical, which is where my work lies, which is if we believe the data that the universe is accelerating, why is this happening? And what I'll try to convey to you is, at first sight, the acceleration is extremely counterintuitive. It's not something you would expect. And so something out of the ordinary must be going on. Of course, we don't know for sure yet. But what is more or less clear is that the universe must be made up of, to a significant degree, must contain a new kind of matter energy, which we have called dark energy. It doesn't give out any light. It has its impact on the overall expansion and acceleration of the universe. And we are still trying to figure it out. And so that's what I'll try to bring out in the second part of the talk. There is a leading theoretical candidate and supported so far with the experiments for what that dark energy could be. It's called the cosmological constant. And I'll tell you what it is. And I'll also tell you our own understanding of how such a kind of dark energy, the cosmological constant, could arise in a fundamental quantum theory of gravity, in a kind of fundamental theory that could explain the workings of gravity. Because we want to understand the workings of the universe starting from a consistent fundamental theory. So that will be the second part of the second half of the talk. How could this acceleration arise, starting from such a fundamental theory? And then towards the end, a brief discussion of some of the future directions, including possibly India's role in the more experimentally oriented questions, which I do hope India will begin to play a bigger and bigger role in the days ahead. So that's the outline, and please do interrupt me anytime you like. This webinar has the disadvantage that I can't see any of you, so I don't know how well I'm doing in terms of reaching out to you. But you can stop me anytime you like. Before we begin, there's one other thing I want to say to you. Since you're all experts in the domain of nuclear science and many other kinds of science, that in nuclear science and in particle physics, we study the subatomic world, the very, very small. And that seems a very different domain from cosmology and the very, very large that I'll be talking about today. But it's one of these amazing things. This has again been a matter of enduring fascination for me in my entire research career, that somehow nature connects the very small with the very large. Very interesting. You go down and down and down into the subatomic world, and what you learn has great implications for the very, very large. It's sometimes said that the serpent, if you think of nature as a serpent, eats its tail, connecting the very smallest with the very largest. And the way this happens is the following. This is a cartoon of the entire history of the universe. We start at the Big Bang, and then after that, shortly, I'll give you some time scales. There is the epoch when the electrons and the protons, which were ions before that, a plasma, each of them combine because the universe is cooling and the temperature becomes about the temperature of the binding energy of hydrogen, little lower. And at that point, the universe from being full of charged plasma becomes neutral. And light can suddenly start propagating over long distances because most of the matter is now neutral. And that is the earliest instances from which we can observe the universe. And I'll have a lot more to say about this. That is this instant drawn here. And from then on, there are observational signals, small perturbations grow to form filaments, which grow, clump further to form galaxies, and so on, eventually forming our galaxy and the solar system and Earth. This is the brief history of the universe playing out over 13.8 or so billion years, 10 to the 9, 13 into 10 to the 9 years. That's the course of it. And the way the connection between the very small and the very large arises, as I've already mentioned, is actually as you go back, the universe gets hotter and hotter. And we have good evidence of this all the way up till this epoch from where the light begins to free stream to us, the epoch of recombination, as it is called. So from very early, we know this general picture is correct, that the universe was very hot and it began cooling down. And as the universe gets hotter, as you all know, the typical energy scales will get bigger. And because of quantum mechanics, when the energies get bigger and bigger, you are typically probing smaller and smaller distances. And so that's why when you go very far into the past, into the history of the universe, you connect to the very small, the subatomic world. And what happens in the beginning, the initial history, determines to a very good extent the future of the universe. And that is why the universe at very large scales today is determined by what happens in the subatomic world, because it was the laws of the subatomic world that you all study in nuclear physics and we study in particle physics, which ultimately determines what happened very early on in the history of the universe, laying down the basic template for how then the universe evolved. So I wanted to say this to you because there are very deep connections between nuclear physics and cosmology. For example, which I won't talk about today, but I hope you know about, and if you don't, you must have. Allow me to suggest one talk just on the connections between nuclear physics and cosmology. And you will enjoy that.
Professor Trivedi,
Yes?
just a minute. I was wondering what
Yes?
made the Big Bang happen actually.
Yeah. So, that's a very, very good question. And we have limits.
Before that, what was there?
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
those are excellent questions. And what happens is there are limits to our knowledge of quantum physics today. And so as you go back and back, ultimately you enter the domain of nuclear physics, and you go further back, you enter the domain of particle physics, and you go further back and you enter the domain of quantum gravity. And that's what I study in string theory and quantum gravity. But we don't understand the subject well enough to say what happened before the Big Bang, or was there even a Big Bang as such, or is that just some words we are using because ultimately we don't know what happened very far in the past, or even whether there was a notion of time at some stage very early, or that notion itself breaks down when you enter the truly quantum world. So here at the very beginnings, ma'am, we are up against our ignorance. But at least starting from the very few microseconds after what we think was the beginning, we can predict the subsequent history with considerable confidence based on the laws we already know and based on experimentally tested facts, tested, for example, at the big colliders in the LHC and so on. That allows us to extrapolate, at least starting from a microsecond after, quite reliably. But if you ask me before that, we get into the domain where we don't know everything. And our knowledge is growing, and some of the connections between quantum gravity and cosmology is actually what I want to bring out in my talk, but we don't understand everything. So I can't give you an answer to that question yet. Um, okay, so I just wanted to say there are very interesting connections. For example, we believe that the light elements, starting from hydrogen, were produced in the very early universe primarily. The heavier elements have been produced inside stars since then, starting from the light. But the very light elements like helium, lithium, etc., were produced starting from hydrogen in the very early universe. And theoretical work allows you to calculate the relative abundances of helium and lithium compared to hydrogen very, I would say, quite reliably based on our knowledge of cosmology. And you can check that against observations done now increasingly. And that gives us confidence that we really do understand our models of cosmology quite well. So this is actually just a side comment, but I wanted to make it that nuclear physics is actually quite intimately tied to the story of nucleosynthesis of the light elements. It's called Big Bang nucleosynthesis. What it is not exactly at the Big Bang, but shortly after that, when the temperatures were of order 1 MeV or so. And that's a fascinating story, and I hope you'll have someone to come and tell you about it if you haven't heard it already. But today I'm going to tell you about dark energy, which is somewhat different. But you will see again that the connection between the very large and the very small that I mentioned will come again when we try to understand, as I had mentioned, from a theoretical footing, how dark energy might originate. Okay, so that's the basic introduction. Let's get going. I want to tell you about the experiments which have shown that the universe is accelerating. Now, what does this even mean? You see, if I told you a car is accelerating, then of course there's a reference frame, typically the Earth. The car is moving, first of all, vis-a-vis the Earth, and then its velocity is changing. That's why we say it's accelerating. But when it comes to the universe as a whole, there is no, after all, external reference frame with which we can, view the universe. So what does it even mean for me to say that the universe is accelerating? Well, the correct conceptual setting for the study of cosmology is actually provided by Einstein's theory of general relativity. And we've just celebrated a few years ago 100 years of that theory. It's one of the remarkable triumphs of, I think, the human intellect, a beautiful theory. And I won't have time to go over that theory, but I'll give you a few basic pictures which encapsulate some of the key ideas, and they're actually quite good. Okay, so I think those pictures will guide us to understand what the acceleration means and understand some of the data. Okay, and the picture is this. Picture the universe as the surface of a balloon. Okay, there's nothing inside the balloon. The whole universe lives on the surface. Okay, so just suppose that were the case. Different galaxies here are pictured at different dots, A, B, C. And as the universe is going forward in time, this balloon is growing bigger and bigger. This is what it means to say that the universe is expanding. Now, what it means a little more in detail is the typical distance between galaxies. When you look at galaxies on long enough distance scales and you take out some local motion, you average it, and you look at big enough distance scales, that typical distance between galaxies is growing with time. And that's what it means to say that the universe is expanding. This is an old discovery going back to the work of Edwin Hubble many decades ago. And the new discovery is that the rate of this expansion is also increasing with time. And that is what we mean when we say that the universe is accelerating. So again, what it means is that typically, if you look at galaxies, they are flying apart from each other a little faster today than they were some time ago. Now, some time ago means these are all cosmological distance and time scales. So you have to look at time scales of order hundreds of millions of years before this rate of change of expansion or even the expansion becomes manifest. it's not as if tomorrow, if you were to carry out observations, you would see the galaxies flying apart faster than today. On that time scale, nothing changes. But on cosmological time scales of a few 100 million years, few billion years, that difference will happen. Oh my God, my pointer has stopped working for some reason. Expand panel. Okay, let's hope. Here, thank God. Okay. So galaxies are flying apart from each other at an increasing rate, faster today than a few 100 million years ago or a billion years. So this is the basic idea of when I say that the universe is expanding and accelerating. Now, to put a few equations, Hubble showed the expansion, and what he actually observed was that at any given epoch, today, if you look at the velocity with which a galaxy is flying apart, then that velocity is, compared to us, dependent on the distance the galaxy is away from us, d. So there's a linear law of proportionality. V is directly proportional to the distance the galaxy is from us. And this is a good law with small corrections at most, and it has been observed. But the small corrections are important, of course, because this constant, Hubble's constant, changes with time, and that is the acceleration we are talking about. But it's well observed, and in honor of Hubble, this constant, which is slightly changing with time, is called Hubble's constant. Okay, just to introduce a terminology, give you some sense of length and time scales. The Hubble constant is 70 kilometers per second per megaparsec. Okay, so its units are velocity over distance, so kilometers per second per megaparsec. This is the cosmological scale. And just to give you a sense, because all of us in nuclear physics, particle physics, we may know meters, seconds, but parsecs is not something we normally work with. 1 parsec is about 3.26 light years. 1 light year is the distance something going as fast as the speed of light would cover in 1 year. So it's a big distance, and that 3.26 times that distance is 1 parsec. It works out to be about 3 into 10 to the 18 centimeters. Okay, so that's the distance. And if you had a galaxy which was that far apart from us, 1 megaparsec, and then 1 megaparsec is 10 to the 6 times that. So if you had a galaxy which was 10 to the 24 centimeters or so from us, it would be 70 kilometers per second. Okay, so these are very, very tiny scales by normal terrestrial physics, but on the universe, they are significant. And what's more important is we can observe with enough data these phenomena that the galaxies go away from each other, and that in fact their rates are changing. Okay, so that's the remarkable thing. Now I'm going to, so this is just a slide to give you some sense of the distance scales. Mentioned a megaparsec. Our Milky Way in size is about 100,000 light years. It's big, but of course, compared to the kind of cosmological scales of millions of light years, that's still small. So it's 100,000 light years. The distance to Andromeda galaxy, which is one of the nearest galaxies to us, is about 2.5 million light years. Okay, so those are typical scales for galaxies and their distances. And then when you go to even longer scales of the distance between, when you have taken an average of many galaxies and so on, that takes you to about 10 to 100 million light years. And that's where these kind of cosmological effects become apparent. Okay, so the universe is accelerating. I at least try to explain what that would mean and now we come to how we know this. But let me just say here that, actually this is a very mysterious fact. I'll have more to say about it. I already mentioned that it will lead us to conclude that there's a kind of new energy component in the universe. All right, so now how do we know this? What's the advances in observations and experiment that have led us to this conclusion? I'll give you an example of some of the advances. One set of experiments have to do with observing this light which comes to us right after the universe, which was full of plasma, became neutral. That light today lies in the microwave background, and it's called the cosmic microwave background. and we've been able to observe it, carry out very precise measurements, and that has taught us a lot. The second way we know about large enough distance scales and what happens on those distance scales is by looking at very bright sources. You know, if you have a star, you can look out typically for stellar distances, but you can't go as far as, you know, even a megaparsec or something. So you need something brighter than an average star. And there are such, luckily for us, bright sources in the universe, and they are called supernovae. A supernova is an exploding star, and in the course of the last few stages of that explosion, it gives rise to a tremendous luminosity. And if you can observe such a supernova, because it's so bright, you can observe them when they are very far away from us. And that way you can find out about the universe at very long distance scales. The third way in which we are now able to do it, these new techniques have only come up over the past decade, is looking, you know, at the universe, not necessarily going very far back in time, but looking at it in a sense at very large distance scales today. How is matter distributed in the universe? It clumps into galaxies, the galaxies clump into groups of galaxies, etc., etc. And understanding that structure in which the universe distributes matter tells us about what must have been the initial imprint laid down very far in the past, as I was saying, which then that blueprint, which then gives rise to the structure today. And that's another way to find out about the universe at long distance and time scales, and so on and so forth. So these are various methods. I'll give you a sense of one or two of them. So let's start with the cosmic microwave background and show you a picture here. So, you know, most of you will recognize this as the black body radiation curve. It's a very famous curve in physics, intimately tied to how quantum theory was invented in the first place. But this is a very, very unusual experimental piece of data, because this curve, as I was saying to you, pertains not to an experiment done in the laboratory, but it pertains to light which comes to us shortly after the Big Bang. How early? The Big Bang occurred about 13.8 billion years ago. The light comes to us about 400,000 years after the Big Bang. Now, 400,000 years is a lot, but you know, when you compare it to 13.8 billion years, it's a very short time frame. So the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. The light started 400 years after the Big Bang. So it's almost 13.8 billion years ago that this light started. And it came to us, and here is the experimental data. And you know what's remarkable is there are error bars here, but you can't see them. They are so precise. The fit to the black body radiation curve is actually better than any fit done by on ground in a terrestrial experiment measuring the black body radiation. That's how good the fit is. This was observed by doing a satellite-based experiment in the late 70s. Sorry, let me back up. The microwave background radiation was first discovered in the late 70s. There's a Nobel Prize given to Penzias and Wilson for that. And then in the I think mid 90s, the Kobe satellite was launched. It carried out this measurement I showed you of the black body radiation of light coming to us. Showed a very precise temperature, because the fit is so good, you can extract the temperature very precisely, which is, you know, accurate to about 4 or let's say 3 significant digits. 2.728 degrees with some error. That's the good fit. That's the temperature of the radiation which has come to us. Now, because we can measure the radiation temperature so well, this is the picture of Penzias and Wilson for discovering the radiation in the first place. And this is a picture of Smoot and Mater, who won the Nobel Prize for then carrying out a precise measurement of the temperature in 2006. Okay, now the story which developed after that was the following. You see, yesterday's great discovery is today's signal and tomorrow's background. So it was the signal, and then later on it became the background. And what people said was, okay, now we can measure the temperature precisely, but let us ask whether the cosmic microwave background coming to us from one direction in the sky and another direction in the sky has exactly the same temperature. And they found that the temperature was not exactly the same. It differed to 1 part in 10 to the 5. And these differences in the temperature as you look in different directions of the sky has taught us a great deal about how the universe evolved, what is the matter making up the universe, what is the energy making up the universe. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Here is some of the data I already told you. Universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Cosmic microwave background, which is radiation coming to us from early on, comes about 400,000 years after the Big Bang. And really, I'll show you some of these pictures um, which have been produced about the small temperature fluctuations. Each dot here is a temperature as a function of the angular direction in the sky in which it has been measured. Somehow, what astronomers like to do is to take blue to be colder, red to be hotter. So, about 1 part in 10 to the 4 or 5, this is colder than the 2.7 to 8 degree Kelvin that I mentioned. The red spots are hotter. And there's a wealth of data here, as you can see. And it's this kind of data that's been produced. I'll show you another experiment. This is the Planck experiment. The earlier experiment was the WMAP experiment. And it's this kind of data which is teaching us a great deal then about the universe through which the light is coming in the course of propagating from almost after the Big Bang, 400,000 years after the Big Bang, to us today. Okay, so this is one class of experiments that's going on, which has taught us a great deal. These are all satellite-based experiments. This is the WMAP satellite, which was launched in 2003. This is the Planck Observatory, launched more recently in 2009. And this is some of the data which is coming out, which has been teaching us. And you know, I can never stop looking at these pictures, because imagine a photograph with this resolution, 1 part in 10 to the 5, from shortly after the Big Bang. Who would have thought humankind could obtain pictures like this, and containing in each of these fluctuations amazing amounts of information? Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we package and you know, understand the information theoretically. So the first thing we do, which will not be a surprise to you, is we do a Fourier transform and we go to the momentum domain. Now, more correctly, since we are measuring temperature as a function of angular scale, this angle on the sky, we go to the multipole moments, the spherical harmonic multipole moments, and we plot the small fluctuations as a function of the multipole moments L. Okay, and so the red is the theoretical curve here, and the dots are the experimental dots. There's some initial error here, which has to do with various uncertainties, statistical uncertainties, which we can't really beat down at low multipole moments, because this error goes like 1 upon root L. But you see, once you leave out that data, the experiment fits very well with the theoretical curve. And again, at high L, there are significant departures. This was the data from WMAP taken about 10 years ago. Now I'll show you the more accurate data from Planck taken later. And you can see in 10 years how much the data has improved. You can go up to multiple moments of about 2,500. You know, I don't know of other branches of physics where you have data going spanning, you know, 2,000 multipole moments. And you can see how good the fit is. The blue is the theoretical curve. The red are the experimental points. And it's really, you know, beautiful. Okay, and it's this kind of a fit that tells us that the theoretical model we have constructed really has some substance to it. You know, we really think we know what is going on. Particularly so because the theoretical model, you know, if you have, as you all know, I don't have to say this to you, 10 pieces of data and some theorist constructs a model with 10 parameters, who's going to be impressed, right? Each data point twiddle your parameter, you'll get it. But here, the model, theoretical model has only 6 parameters, and it fits the data which goes across 2000 data points, 2000 values of L. And you can see how good the fit is. And that is the kind of reason why we believe the theoretical model. Just about 6 input parameters, and you get such a good fit. And one of the interesting things is, sometimes you have a theoretical model, it has a few input parameters, but figuring out the experimental consequences requires very heavy duty computation. So now, sometimes in computer work, as we all know, garbage in, garbage out, you don't know how reliable that was, this, that, and the other, what are the errors. But the amazing thing is, here the calculations can all be done with pen and paper. Everything can be done analytically. So you take the model with 6 parameters, you can work out with pen and paper the consequences, and you can literally derive this curve, which you then go and fit against data. Okay, so it's a very happy situation for a theorist where pen and paper carries you through and gives you confidence that the model is right. Okay, now I'm just going to show you a little bit of data. This is not, don't worry, I'll highlight the key points. I told you there were 6 input parameters. Here are the 6 input parameters you put into the model, and then you fit the data, and then you extract all the other parameters, which are intimately tied to the 6 parameters you put in, but they are cross-correlated with each other, and the data helps to cross-correlate them. Okay, and that's how the model works. And now I'm going to tell you some of the key parameters which you learn about. The other thing I want you to just look at here is, how good the error bars are, so now, but first let me tell you what this is. H naught is this constant, today, the Hubble constant, which tells you how fast the galaxies are flying apart in units of kilometers per second or megaparsec again. I told you it's about 70. Here is the more precise value based on the Planck experiment today, one of our best experiments, 67.36. But what's important is the error bar. The error bar is about 1%, right? 1 part in 100, little more than that. But these are experiments going out at such large distances. So this is quite impressive. Now, of course, you have to cross-correlate different experiments. They don't quite agree. And actually, there's something interesting about that for the Hubble constant I'll come to at the end. But just to give you a sense, this is how well we are able to do. Omega lambda is what fraction of the energy density is in this new kind of matter. So, matter energy. So one of the most important things which comes out is that when you try and fit the data, you cannot fit it unless you allow the universe to have new kinds of matter and energy. It just doesn't fit. If you just take all the familiar forms, you take the protons, you take the electrons, you take the photons, you take the neutrinos even, which we know about, whose properties we know, and you try to fit the data, it goes completely wrong. And that is what forces you to account for new kinds of matter energy. And you need actually 2 kinds of new kinds of matter energy. One is dark energy, and the other is called dark matter. And I'll tell you a little bit about the difference. But what you find when you fit the data is that about 70%, about 0.70 of the total fraction, so out of 1.70, which is 70% or so, is a new kind of energy we call dark energy, which is what I'll talk about after this. And the remaining 30% also cannot be baryons, protons, etc., electrons, neutrinos. It's got to be something new, mostly something new, and that is what we call dark matter. And when you put it all together, also comes out an age for the universe, which is about 13.8 billion years. Okay, so this is the kind of fit we get, and this is why we believe some of these models. Okay, now that's one experiment. There are others, but we'll move on. You can cross-correlate the data, and the data also, when you cross-correlate, is good. For example, using supernovae, there were beautiful experiments done for which the 2011 Nobel Prize was given, which also gives us very important data. Here, I'm showing you how the different kinds of data cross-correlate. The cosmic microwave background lies tells you that some parameters, the fraction of the energy in dark energy or in matter, lie along the orange curves, orange band. Supernova tells you something else. Baryon acoustic oscillations tell you something else, and they all intersect quite well in this region. Okay, within their confidence levels or error bars. This is similar data. So that tells us that you can do this in various ways. So that sort of tells us that we know roughly know quite well what is going on. Now, what I've shown you here is going to be relevant for the subsequent discussion, that you also try to model, if let's say we agree that there is this new kind of matter energy called dark energy, can we try to model it in some way? And I'll tell you what these parameters are. But for now, the only thing to remember is, had omega equal to omega naught along the x-axis come out to be -1 and omega a come out to be 0, then the model for dark energy is something called the cosmological constant. And you see when you there are different kinds of data, satellite-based data, supernova data, baryon acoustic oscillations, etc. You try to put it all together. It actually, there's an interesting discrepancy, slight discrepancy, that the center doesn't lie at omega equals -1, but omega naught equals -1, but it at least lies within the central confidence level core. So that tells you that, the cosmological constant, which is for theoretical reasons an attractive possibility, is also allowed. I'll tell you more what this idea means, but this is just to show you that the data also is in agreement with that. Okay, so now what happened? Uh-oh, my pointer has frozen. Not a good sign. Acha, thank. Something happened here. I'm going to have to go back a little bit and unshare and share, I think. क्योंकि ये तो फंस गया किसी कारण. Okay, please excuse me. I'm going back.
At the top
And
of the screen, you will get
I will just
you
get,
take a pointer to the top of the screen.
yes, I'm there. I'll stop sharing, I think, and come back,
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
Okay, so I'm stopping sharing, and now I say share again. So I go here, and I share. Can you see it now? Can you see my screen?
Yeah. We are able to see.
But I'm not able to change my pointer. Arre baap re. Now it worked. You're able to see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so so that's where we were, and I'll just tell you a little bit now. So I already summarized what has come out in terms of the data, and to recap, about 70% of the universe seems to be made of a really strange form of energy called dark energy, and the remaining 30% also has many mysteries in it. And let's try to understand why I'm emphasizing that it must be this a strange kind of energy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Einstein. So the talk will get a little more theoretical now, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of how Einstein's theory of gravity, general relativity works. So remember, I told you, let's think of the universe as a balloon. So let's suppose that balloon has a radius r, which is of course changing with time because the balloon is getting bigger and bigger. That constant of proportionality between velocity and distance is the Hubble constant, r dot over r, right? Velocity over distance. And what Einstein's theory tells you is, what is the second derivative? What is the acceleration? Just as for ordinary mechanics, you have Newton's laws, which tell you that the acceleration must be determined by the forces acting on the system. Einstein's theory tells you what determines the acceleration of the universe in terms of what makes up the universe. This was the key content of Einstein's general theory of relativity. So let's look at what form that equation takes, okay? R double dot over R, so you can see this is an acceleration, is proportional to rho plus 3p. Rho is the energy density making up the universe. P is the pressure making up the universe. And it's the combination rho plus 3p. Okay. That enters on the right hand side, importantly with a negative sign. Okay, with a negative sign. And with G Newton in front, that's because you're talking of gravitation. So Newton's constant of gravitation must of course appear. So G Newton appears here, but importantly with this negative sign. Now what that means is the following. You see, if you had familiar matter, like made out of protons or electrons, energy density is positive. You take some gas, plasma of that matter, pressure is positive. Both terms are positive. The universe will not accelerate, but it will decelerate. Okay, wrong sign from what we are seeing in the data. And there is a very intuitive way to understand that. You see, the law of gravitation of Newton says that any two bodies attract themselves, attract each other, right? You know, take two point particles, take two masses, they always attract. They never repel due to gravity. This is the great speciality of gravity, unlike electrostatics or something. They always attract. And so if you think of those different dots on the surface of the balloon as different galaxies, you would expect, because of the Newton's law of gravitation, they should be attracting each other. And that means the rate at which they are flying apart should be slowing down, not increasing, right? Not accelerating. That is the content of Einstein's theory also, if you put in familiar kinds of matter. But the data tells us that actually there's acceleration, and it's very good data, as I try to convince you. So therefore, there must be something new. And the something new has got to be something very strange, because one or the other has to be negative, you know. And what we do in that, we really can't account theoretically for negative energy density. You know, it becomes very hard. But how dark energy works is that the energy density is positive, but the pressure is negative. And the pressure is negative and greater in magnitude than, you know, 1/3 rho, so that the total value of this term becomes negative. And then you have something negative multiplying something negative, giving rise to acceleration. So this is the basic idea, but it requires something really new, some new kind of matter energy, which has negative pressure, okay, but positive energy density. And this is the basic idea of dark energy. And we are sort of forced to it, okay? And just to say to you that, you know, negative pressure is very strange, because intuitively you would think if something has negative pressure, it's some unstable kind of matter. You know, if you typically have negative pressure, you have a system which will implode, right? If you have positive pressure, you'll have expansion. You have negative pressure, you have implosion. And so if the universe is full of this new kind of negative pressure energy, it should be imploding. Why is it accelerating? And this is one thing I can't really convey intuitively to you, except to say that, you know, our normal Newtonian intuition breaks down when we apply it to the universe at longest of distance scales, where Einstein's theory comes into play. And here is what the theory says, as I said, that indeed, if you have negative enough pressure to overwhelm the positive energy density, because of this factor of 3, you're going to get a acceleration. Okay, so that's how it works. This is the idea behind dark energy. And in fact, the kind of dark energy we work with, called the cosmological constant, as I mentioned to you, it fits the data well. In that kind of dark energy, pressure is proportional to energy density, but the proportionality constant is negative. And actually for the cosmological constant, it's -1. That omega naught I was showing you is actually -1. And that actually is what fits the data very well. So where did it go? Never mind, it was too far in the past. Here, that omega naught is that proportionality constant in the equation of state, and that fits the data quite well. And that, from a theoretical perspective, is what I would say is the most natural explanation for what might be happening. Okay, so this is where we are. The data has come out, it's quite strong. You can't ignore its statistical significance. It leads us to this rather interesting conclusion, and it challenges us theoretically to come up with an explanation for dark energy. So, what could dark energy be? If it's the cosmological constant with P equal to minus rho, how can it arise? How can this state of energy or matter energy arise? This is the theoretical question, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll stop because I might be already going over time a little bit. If I go on for about 10 minutes, is it okay?
Yeah,
Is
it's
that
fine. It is fine. It is fine. Please go ahead.
okay? So theoretically, when you start thinking about it, it turns out that the cosmological constant is really a very is something not so hard to understand, and it corresponds to the ground state energy of the system. Well, what system? Everything making up the universe. You know, we have the electrons, we have the protons, we have many other particles, many other fields, and so on in the system. You have all the degrees of freedom of quantum chromodynamics, the weak interactions, gravity, everything, and just the ground state energy of that system, or more correctly, energy density, is what really is the cosmological constant. That ground state energy density enters on the right hand side in that Einstein equation I showed you, determining the acceleration of the universe. So to put it more simply, if you had a particle rolling in a potential, you know, it would have, if it were just in classical mechanics, it would roll. If there's a little bit of friction, it would settle down to to the bottom of the potential. And at that point, it would have some energy if you're measuring your potential energy from some reference point, which is just the height of the minimum of the potential. The idea here is similar, but with some important differences, which I'm going to come to, which is, you know, in classical mechanics, there is no absolute notion of where you measure potential energy from, right? Somebody else may measure it from here. Somebody may measure it from a little displace. Somebody may measure it from even further displace. So there's no real physical significance to it. But it turns out when you are coupling a system to gravity, what is the notion of energy? There is an absolute notion of energy, because that energy then causes the back reaction or the expansion of the universe, or the acceleration, as I was showing you. So when you're talking about a system coupled to gravity, there is an absolute notion of energy, and it's the ground state energy with respect to that absolute notion, which you have to think about and ask whether that's positive, to try and explain whether you can get this kind of dark energy. Now, there's a second aspect, which is that you have to think about it in the context of quantum mechanics, because, you know, if you just had classical mechanics, as I was saying, the lowest energy state would just be the system sitting at the bottom of the well. But as you all know, in quantum mechanics, you have Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty. So the particle can't just sit at the bottom of the well. It has to have some uncertainty in its position and in its momentum. And that means there is some irreducible quantum jitter. And that irreducible quantum jitter means if it's a harmonic oscillator, for example, as some of you will remember, if E naught was the bottom of the potential, the true energy of the ground state is E naught plus half h bar omega. And so you have to think about the quantum contribution if you have to compute the ground state energy as well. Okay, now it might seem the quantum contribution is small, but the universe is made out of many degrees of freedom, each of which has a quantum jitter. And when you add it all up, that total net quantum jitter can itself become quite significant. And so you really have to incorporate quantum effects. And so therefore, to understand the ground state energy and ask whether it's positive and whether it can give rise to dark energy, you have to do two things. You need to have a theory of gravity, because it's only when you couple the system to gravity does the absolute notion of where the ground state is and its energy, and rather does the notion of what the ground state energy is, begin to make sense. So you need to couple the system to gravity, and you need to include quantum mechanics. And that means, from a theoretical point of view, if you want to ask how could dark energy arise, then you need to think of a theory which has quantum mechanics and gravity put together in a mathematically consistent manner. Okay, and this is the kind of theory you want. And it turns out actually over the past 20 years, we have been developing such a theory, and it's called string theory. I won't go into it today because this is a talk in its own right and so on, but there is such a theory. The theory is still under development, so I can't answer for you the kind of question that was asked to me, what happened exactly at the Big Bang? But all the evidence tells us that it's a quantum mechanically, mathematically consistent theory of quantum mechanics put together with gravity. And so what we asked ourselves when the data started getting good already several years ago was, can we use string theory and ask, is it even possible to get a positive value of the cosmological constant, the ground state energy, so that we could understand how this kind of mysterious dark energy might arise? And it took us quite a lot of work because we had to develop the theory, you have to understand its solutions, and then you have to ask, do you get solutions anything like what the cosmology indicates is the universe we are living in? And this took quite a lot of theoretical work, which I'll skip over, several papers and so on. And at the bottom of it, at the end of it, we could indeed find solutions in this quantum mechanically consistent theory of gravity, which gave rise to what are called de Sitter vacua. That's a technical term, but that term indicated that you were getting this kind of positive cosmological constant and expansion. Now, this is already many years ago, but this was just the first paper showing it could happen. And there's been several more now, decades of work on this idea. We have ourselves worked on it here in TIFR. And oh my God, again, my pointer has gone, is it? And the bottom line, I'll have to stop this and go back.
It's working. It's working, sir.
Sorry?
It's working, I think. You can try it.
Again froze. And bottom line is that today there's a lot of evidence that at least in such a theory, you do get these kind of, you do get these kind of, what should I do now? I have to start.
Share again.
Share.
Yeah.
Share screen, share again. I think this is a signal that I should be stopping. So bottom line is that, oh my God. It really doesn't like it now for some reason. Okay, give me one more minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me do once more. I stop sharing. Then I say that I want to start sharing again. So I go here. Then I say, okay, choose this screen. Say share.
You have to do full screen for your presentation.
Got it. Am I not doing full screen? Achha.
Now you are.
Okay. Luckily, it's working. So let me conclude. So bottom line is that, we have a theoretical understanding. It's far from complete. Work is going on. Here's a paper just to show you that I wrote recently. And there's, lots of other people who have contributed. I won't give you a total list. But there's growing confidence that such kinds of accelerating universes can indeed arise in a quantum mechanically consistent description of gravity. So that's where we stand. What's going to happen in the future? Just to leave you with some taste of things to come. First of all, the data is going to get even better. And actually, the data doesn't all fit. You saw that actually the central region of overlap is a little offset from, there's some discrepancy among the various experiments. This discrepancy is at about the 10% level. But that is getting to be important because the error bars in each individual experiment are shrinking. I'll show you that. This is the cosmic microwave background radiation latest experiment, the Planck experiment. And look at the error bar here shown in red at 1 sigma. And here is another experiment done using supernovae, which probes the universe much more recently. Bigger error bars, But if you look at it from the CMB point, cosmic microwave radiation point of view, this is already 4-5 sigma discrepancy, and other experiments lie in between. So some of this, is going to get settled in the next few years, and let us see whether all the data lines up within error bars, or whether even our understanding that there is dark energy, what form it takes, is it the cosmological constant, is it something else, whether that needs to be corrected. This is most important. This is definitely going to be an important part of what happens. Okay, then we are going to probe the behavior of gravity on big scales in other ways. There are gravity wave experiments going on. You might have heard about LIGO, but also other gravity wave experiments looking at gravity waves which came to us from shortly after the Big Bang, just as light came to us. I told you light could start traveling to us after matter became neutral, because then the mean free path becomes big. You don't have charged plasmas. But gravity actually is unobstructed. It's much more weakly coupled than light. So if you can start observing gravity waves, you can look at the universe even from much before when light reaches us. And the hope is that we'll be able to detect gravity waves in that way. That's going to be something which we hope the data comes out about, experiments can deliver about. That will teach us a lot. There'll be progress on theoretical techniques and string theory and so on. And that's very exciting for me, and will teach us about whether we know from a theoretical end whether you can get dark energy of this type. And last of all, I want to say a little bit about India. I've been sad, Indian theorists, and I've only talked about my work. I apologize for that. But many theorists have also worked at the interface of connecting experiment with data and made very important contributions. But really, experimentally, we have been spectators. And that may change, with ISRO's amazing launch capabilities now. The European Space Agency has approached us, and the European astronomy community would like to do a joint project with us for the next generation of cosmic microwave background radiation experiments. There's a mission which is being talked about called CMB Bharat. It's at a very, very early stage. It's not as if it's gotten through any levels of approval at ISRO, but at least there's interesting talk, and I hope something like this can mature. The Indian science community also needs to grow in terms of its experimental capability. So that would have to happen for this experiment to be something we can pull off. But something like that we can do. On another front, I didn't talk about dark matter at all. I just told you in passing about 25% of the universe is a new kind of matter. This is not as mysterious as dark energy because it doesn't have negative pressure. In fact, it has zero pressure when we model it, but it's not anything we know about. What is dark matter? That's also a key question. And in fact, we had planned a dark matter detector, which was being developed by Saha Institute and so on in the DA family with the rest of us, which would locate the INO facility, the Indian Nuclear Neutrino Observatory facility. But as you know, that observatory has gotten into trouble. But I think dark matter is a very, very important topic, and there are many possibilities for India to really do groundbreaking work in this area, and including new ideas involving advances in quantum technology to build new kinds of detectors. That's something I'm very passionate about today, how we can do this, use the advances in quantum technology which are occurring to try and further our knowledge of particle physics and cosmology. And I really, really hope that India can play a bigger role in that. So those are the hopes. And with that, let me stop. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Professor. Now, if there are any questions, you can unmute and ask. A couple of them we can take.
Sure. And if you like, I can also further discuss with you on email as you like. But of course, here for sure.
Vasudev Rao here. Can I ask a question?
Hi, please.
It is maybe very simplistic, Professor Trivedi. First of all, I want to thank you for a very, very fascinating lecture, which took us into a completely new domain from what we know. I just want to ask a very, maybe it's a silly question. Okay, you said that dark energy is something difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Is there any physical connotation for dark matter? Is it that there is something actually in terms equivalent to our Earth or any other body here, which we are unable to observe? Is it like that, or what is it exactly?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I didn't have time, otherwise I would have spoken more about dark matter. But dark matter is much easier to understand in that it's a new kind of matter and it doesn't give out light, or more correctly, too much light. So we haven't been able to observe it in the sky. But the hope is that it's a new kind of particle, which is very, very long lived. So it was produced sometime after the Big Bang, and it's still around, contributing to the energy and pressure of the universe, or at least the energy of the universe. And in that sense, it's a more down to earth object. But it's not something we know about like electrons or even neutrinos, because we can account for them and they don't account for the required additional amount of matter. So the key is, what is dark matter? There were some theoretical ideas that dark matter is a new kind of particle that the Large Hadron Collider would be able to see. So far, the data which has come out from the Large Hadron Collider finds no evidence for that kind of dark matter. So that says at least that window is closed. But that was not the only possibility. There are other possibilities. And these are the kind of possibilities which actually, interestingly, can be tested without building a very big collider. And, I think some of those possibilities is what I'm hopeful in India, we might be able to build a detector. So the bottom line is that the search has now turned towards these other kind of possibilities increasingly. And I think in the next decade or so, we will know. But it's a very good question, because let's say after searching, we close off various avenues, then we will have a sort of tension between what cosmology is telling us and what experimental particle physics is telling us. That experimentally we can't find this new kind of particle, but cosmologically there seems to be evidence for it. And I think that's very interesting, but we have to wait and see how the story develops. So thank you for that question.
Hello, my name is Rajiv. I have a question.
Yeah, I think you're. You please proceed with your question.
Yeah. Am I audible and clear, or otherwise there's a disturbance?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Sir, I've been very, very, looking forward to this conference. Actually, I've been contacting certain friends and others of mine to help me understand relativity and certain implications and so on. And actually, one of my somebody I knew recommended me to join this conference. I'm very, very happy to have actually been here. Your talk was very, very illuminating in various aspects which I've been actually looking for answers for. Sir, thanks for everyone who have made this, allowed us to meet. So, sir, I have some basic questions. I don't want to prolong, but in some of my questions, for instance, galaxy rotation curve problem in astrophysics or cosmology, it has been attributed. One of the answers, one of the solutions was to attribute to dark matter.
Yes.
Saying that why the galaxy rotation is constant even though you go away from the center of the galaxy, and so on and so forth. So that's one question of mine. That is, how do we explain this at a fundamental level? If it's so observable, so like uniformly across hundreds of elliptical galaxies, then there must be some very fundamental answer to this problem. Right. And
yes.
So I would like you to maybe say something. I have one more question to follow up. Because I was trying to understand this myself. Of course, I'm not a theoretical physicist. My background is quite basic. But I was trying to understand Einstein's field equation, which also has this lambda cosmological constant. And when you said, for instance, some time ago that when omega is -1 and other one is 0, that equates to cosmological constant. So I had this question, or this idea came to me, that if in Einstein's field equation you substitute the right hand side as 0, which is a k t u v as 0, and look at just the other two, which is the GUV plus lambda small GUV, right? You're actually saying that then it means that the first term, which is the GUV, which is the expansion of space, right, is equal to minus lambda GUV, which means you're almost saying that space-time curvature can be caused only by dark energy.
Yes.
No mass, no momentum, no
Yes.
pressure, nothing.
Yes. Yes.
So I just wanted to, share a few words because for me, all this is very new. So if you could please illuminate us on this.
Yes. Yes. Both are very nice questions. Let me start first with actually your first question, which I don't have any slides. I'm sorry for the galaxy rotation curves, but you're quite right that just to say to everyone that, what is observed is that if you look at how fast, if you take our galaxy, then the various stars rotate around the center. Just as in the solar system, the planets go around the sun, the galaxy also has a center and the various stars are going around it. And of course, the rate of rotation depends on the gravitational attractive force that the star experiences. And when you try to model what the force might be, and you try to compare it with your estimate for how much matter there is, you find that in fact the two don't fit. And this is what was being referred to, that you seem to require to explain the pace, the rate at which the stars are going around, you seem to require more matter. Where is that additional matter? And the idea is that in fact that additional matter is the dark matter which the cosmological scale experiments are also telling us must exist. So the experiments I described to you were on cosmological scales, where you're really viewing distances which are much bigger than the size of a galaxy, hundreds of millions of light years or a billion light years even. And that is telling us that you have additional matter, dark matter. And the idea is that dark matter, even on a galactic scale, has an important influence, and it is to change these rotation curves. And in fact, if you work out the parameters, it works. That is, if about 25% of the matter energy is in dark matter, it can try to fit the kind of curves you are seeing. So roughly the estimates line up. But of course, the key question is, what is, as Professor Rao was also asking, what is that dark matter? And we haven't found it yet. And so it's a really big mystery, but there is evidence coming for dark matter, as you correctly said, not only from cosmology, but also from galaxy scale physics. So we feel confident that there must be something like this, but the final word will be when we can actually observe it in the laboratory and tell what its properties are. If it's weakly interacting like neutrinos, even more weakly interacting, we should be still able to detect it, and then we will be more confident of our underlying assumptions and understanding. So that remains, I think, next decade we'll surely see progress on this question. Okay, now coming to your second question, this is quite true. Even if the universe had only the cosmological constant, and our universe is close to that today, if the data is correct, because it says 70%. So to the extent 70% would have been 100%, that's the case you had in mind. And then P would be, rho would have been the energy density, and P would have been minus rho. So the total here, because that's what happens if you have the cosmological constant. So this would have been rho minus 3 rho, which is minus 2 rho, times a minus, as I said to you. So the net would have been a plus sign times 2 rho times this constant involving g Newton. And that's the rate at which the universe would have been accelerating only because of dark energy. That would have been enough. In fact, the dark matter present today acts the other way. It has no pressure, but it has energy density, which is positive. So in fact, it slows down the acceleration compared to what dark energy is doing. But that's required to fit the data. So you're quite right in Einstein's field equations. This is one of those equations. So by the way, the field equations seem mysterious, but look, at root, they're very simple. We all do Newtonian mechanics, x double dot mx double dot equal to force. It's basically like that. R double dot over R, fine, equal to energy density plus pressure or something. So not so mysterious. So indeed, Einstein's equations do tell you that just the cosmological constant would drive the acceleration of the universe. You're
So
correct.
for that, you have to substitute P equal to minus rho in this equation.
Correct. That's
Thank
it.
you, sir.
P equal to minus rho. That's all. Yes.
Thank you, Rajiv. Any other question, please? Ms. Mehta, you have any question?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead. Indira, go ahead.
Yeah, you were telling that again a naive question only. When I'm not an expert in this, I just want to know when you are saying that there is acceleration, universe is accelerating. So that means
Yes.
it is creating some and expanding also. So it is creating some space.
Yes.
From where the space is coming?
So now, yeah, that's right. I mean, in a sense, that is what it means. My pointer is frozen again. God save me. I can't go back. Never mind. But that's right. It's a little bit like the balloon. You're on the whole universe is the surface of the balloon, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So indeed, the fabric is getting bigger, right? Except that there's no real material. It's not like there's rubber. There's just the abstract concept of space here. And, so in a sense, space is being created, if you like, but the more correct thing is just to say that the universe is getting bigger. It's not as if more galaxies per se are being created. The distance between them is getting bigger. That's what happens. That is allowed by Einstein's theory. The matter and the energy density and pressure determine whether the size of the balloon grows and its acceleration grows or not. And in this case, it seems that the kind of matter energy in the universe is making that grow at a faster and faster rate. So, yeah, I mean, it seems strange, but space and time are not made out of anything. They have implications, and their implications do work out so that the distance between galaxies is growing at an accelerating rate. That's the way it works.
So much. Your talk was excellent, really, Like a small child understanding several things. Like I understood many things from your.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Indira. Thank you very much. Mehta sir, you want to speak? You have some comments? Sir, you unmute yourself. Mehta sir, you unmute yourself. No, he has to unmute.
Mehtaji is not audible.
Are you
No, he
audible
has to
now?
unmute. Yeah, you are audible now. You please go ahead, sir.
Yes. First of all, let me thank Professor Tiwari for the excellent talk. You have reminded me
Thank you so much.
the days when we used to be invited to a lecture by Professor G.K. Menon. And we used to be crowded in one single big room in the Express building in Churchgate. And he used to give a talk where all the facilities of overhead projection and everything were not there. With his chalk and the blackboard, he used to create a lot of enthusiasm in on that. But I still want to be wondering one thing that if there are a number of galaxies, is there any interaction with them? What is the kind of situation can happen if they galaxy interact? Can they lead to any sort of thing which is unpleasant or new thing that will happen? Thank you very much.
It's a fantastic question, actually, Mehta Saab. It's a really great question. And the answer is, and I really am sorry, I didn't come prepared for some of this. I maybe should have anticipated. The answer is you have in the sky situations where two galaxies come and collide with each other. And this is a, literally galactic scale collision. And in fact, you learn about matter in the universe and dark matter through that, because it turns out that You see, dark matter, we are thinking, interacts feebly with ordinary matter. And when the two galaxies collide on cosmological scale, you can, because light comes to us at various epochs, you can image the galaxies going past each other after the collision. And it turns out that the ordinary matter interacts more strongly and takes a longer time to go past each other. But the the dark matter goes past more rapidly. And so if you can study the gravitational effects, which you can because of light bending around the galaxies, then you can see that the dark matter has moved past, but the ordinary matter is still there. And this is actually additional evidence for us that there is dark matter. And it comes because of exactly what you said, that, each of these galaxies, which has millions and millions of stars, actually collide with each other. And then the dark matter in them also collides with each other. And that teaches us a lot about things. And they are spectacular events. Again, the recent advances in observational cosmology are able to image these kinds of events, which is really quite spectacular. So,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
So I think we had a good number of questions. Now I'll request Mr. Darnay to just round off the matter that was presented, and then we will have a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ramarao ji. I hope I am audible and clear.
Yeah.
Okay. The top characteristics from whatever the lecture was delivered, as well as the question answers which followed that, we can unanimously say that the lecture was absolutely convincing. Because in the matter of astronomy, when there are so many things happening and at such a large scale, just now we were talking about one question answer session about colliding galaxies and the bending of the light because of the dark matter. And I was reading somewhere that, well, there is a Requiem supernova which happened sometime in the past, will again be visible because of this bending of light in 2027. So when the situations are so confusing for a normal mind, getting a convincing lecture is very difficult. And this was really a very fantastic lecture, convincing us, giving the fundamentals, starting from the basics, like what is the reference of frame of the reference for acceleration, which we are talking, what do we mean by acceleration, how we define it, what it is causing, and things like that. So starting with a very basic understanding of the subject, we have gone to dark energy, dark matter, and what role it plays, and so many things which are not what you can say easily understandable or against our common sense, like a negative pressure, and how does it contribute into the acceleration of the universe. So these basics or these ideas which are new to us and which are not what you can say easily assimilable, those were very convincingly explained by Professor Trivedi. And Hubble's law, he talked about Hubble's law right in the beginning, and the Hubble's constant, which was again under some clouds recently, looking at the measurements using CMB or looking at the measurements using Cepheids. And now again, they are saying that, well, these two types of things are again now matching and they are sort of converging. So when we are talking about dark energy and dark matter, it becomes a sort of what you can say, as the name itself suggests, it is invisible, ununderstandable, but playing a major role in the universe. So for people like us who are at the one end of the spectrum, like very short distance forces like nuclear forces, understanding of the another end of the spectrum with gravitational waves going for billions of light years in the sky. So that was a big task, and I must say most humbly that Dr. Trivedi has done a fantastic job in giving us the basics and the understanding of this accelerating universe. He was very right in saying that experimental capabilities of India need to be improved substantially. And he was talking about Indian neutrino observational laboratories. I had been following those I know efforts because one of my friends was involved in it, Dr. Vivek Datar. And I have been following it because I have been following it about its public outcry against it, the government decisions and all those things. And it was very sad really that it could not come up at that place. Now he was telling me recently that there are some other places which are being considered and other type of setups being considered. So I hope that as Professor Trivedi has explained us that we should be moving ahead in the experimental capabilities to match our theoretical astrophysics capabilities. And as he was talking, a very enthusiastic thing that European space commissions are talking with us for collaboration, and that's something really great for us. That means our contribution by our scientists like Professor Trivedi has been recognized on the international scale, and they consider us as worthy partners. I think on overall experience of this lecture was wonderful personally to me, and I hope that it was really wonderful and convincing for the audience also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dharmendra.
Thank you very much.
Now, may I request, Malhotra ji.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. This is Swapnish Malhotra, Secretary IISc, and I am here to pose a vote of thanks for the just concluded sixth webinar of INS. You all will agree, first and foremost, I thank Professor Sandeep Trivedi for the superlative talk on universe and taking, I mean, as Mr. Dharne just mentioned, taking the subatomic scientists from those subatomic distances to those great distances. It was really, I mean, appreciable. We were fascinated. Next, I am calling Dr. Ramarao, Dr. Ramanamurthy, Sri Dharne, and other members of the webinar committee of INS for arranging this webinar. Kindly be patient with me, others can stop speaking and get muted, get themselves muted. It's a matter of hardly 1 minute. I express my gratitude to Shri S.K. Mehta, President INS, and the entire executive committee of INS for their continued support. I also thank Shri Anurag Sharma from HBNI and Shri Shimijit Rajagopal for their valuable contributions. Last but not the least, though in fact I am a little dejected, slightly less in numbers, but whoever naturally when you are less, you become all the more important. So I thank all the audience, and naturally I can't complain to you. You are the ones who can hear me right now. So I can't really complain to you. My complaint is to those guys who are not able to hear me right now. They have not come. So kindly spread a word. Tell your friends who were not here in this webinar. Next time they must see. It takes great efforts for the speaker to prepare a talk and deliver it. It takes slightly lesser, maybe slightly lesser effort for INS to arrange this kind of webinar. So I can only request that those who are present, I thank you very much. I thank you profusely. But at the same time, I increase your responsibility. Next time you be there, but each one of you should bring at least six people with you. Okay. So now, before I conclude my vote of thanks, let me tell you about the next webinar, which is now totally on a different topic. It is going to be on 9th October, where Dr. Rajendra Badve, Director TMC, will speak on the topic of everybody's concern, that is cancer in India. Kindly join and induce others to join, as I already said, induce others to join for this important webinar. Till then, goodbye, see you, and Jai Bharat. Namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nice, very nice talk.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I think you will be
Thank you very much on behalf of
YouTube also,
INS,
isn't it?
and we hereby close the webinar. we meet on 9th October. Okay, signing off. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Malhotra ji. Thank you very much.
Mehta ji. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.